All right, we have gone through the skull, we've gone through the ribs and the vertebral column, the sacrum and the coccyx. Now we're on to the last part of the skeleton, which would be the appendicular skeleton. Appendicular skeleton is going to include both the arms and legs, as well as the pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. So we're going to start right here with the pectoral girdle. Another name for the pectoral girdle is the shoulder girdle. Shoulder girdle is made up of two things. It's made up of a scapula and a clavicle. So I have two scapula or scapulae and two clavicles. And their job is to support and to attach the arms to the body, okay, or attach them to the rib cage, which you can see there. So a couple of things you need to know as you're looking um, at the shoulder girdle and what it's doing. So first of all, let's focus on this bone right here, the clavicle. The clavicle has two parts to it, two ends, I should say. It has a sternal end. Sternal end would be closest to the sternum, so this would be the sternal end. And then it has an acromial end, acromial. Acromial end is out here. They call it the acromial end because this portion of the scapula is called the acromion process, which we'll come back to. And that forms two joints. Okay, so the clavicle is going to attach to the sternum down here. Specifically, it's going to attach at the manubrium, and that's going to form the sternoclavicular joint. Put the two words together: sternum and clavicle. The sternoclavicular joint, or you'll see it called the SC joint. Okay, then all the way at the other side, where the clavicle articulates with the scapula at the acromion process, that's called the AC joint or acromioclavicular joint. So if I go back to this one, you can see there's a little ligament holding these things together. This right here is the acromion process. This would be the AC joint between those two bones. Okay. So when you move your arm around, you take your arm over your head or you go in circles, whatever, you can feel these joints moving all the way down here at your chest because, um, this is attaching our arm to the rest of our body. Now, if we're focusing just on the scapula has a lot of stuff in it. Okay. So you can see a bunch of these things later. I want to focus on this view of it. Basically, we have this thing turned sideways, and we're looking at it right from the side. Okay. Most important thing that you're going to see here is something called the glenoid cavity or the glenoid fossa. You see right there. Glenoid cavity is this depression where the head of the humerus is going to fit into. So the head of the humerus is this kind of ball-shaped or dome-shaped structure. It's going to fit into that glenoid cavity that's going to form our shoulder joint. We call it a ball and socket joint. Okay, that's between two things here: acromion process and the coracoid process. Though the acromion process I just mentioned, that's the one that's going to articulate with or connect to the clavicle. Okay. Now, if I go on this side, this is the anterior view. Now, to distinguish between the anterior and posterior view, on the posterior view, I have this big ridge running across the back of it. It's called the scapular spine, and you can see it right there. Okay. And while we're in class and you are holding a scapula, you'll be able to see these things a little bit better. Okay. But on the front side of it, you can see really not a whole lot to notice here. You have a superior border just at the top. Lateral would be away from the midline, medial towards the midline. Okay, so if I'm looking at a scapula, I know that these things, all these structures have to be lateral from the midline or farther away from the midline. Okay, so I have a acromion process, which is a little bit higher. That's the one that's going to connect to my clavicle. So if you followed my pointer, the clavicle would kind of extend like this on the front side of the body. Then this thing, the coracoid process. Okay, the coracoid process is just one of these things that's an attachment site for ligaments within the shoulder joint. But you notice that the scapula is this broad triangular um, looking bone. It is a flat bone, and it's our shoulder blade. So you actually could feel it in the back part of your body if you're flexible enough. Posterior view, you see a lot of the same things. acromion process is always going to be superior to the coracoid process, as you can see on both angles and looking down at it from this angle. Okay. That's pretty much it with the pectoral girdle or the scapula. Okay, so in my next video, we'll talk about how the arms are connecting to it and how that shoulder joint is formed.